Hey, what's going on, Chime family? It's Andrew here. I wanted to just go ahead and make a video regarding some questions that were asked to me over Facebook the other day. First off, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who decided to ask me a question. This is the type of stuff I absolutely love doing. I love research. I love science. I love nutritional research, obviously. I'm pursuing my master's in it, so I'm very passionate about this stuff. So please feel free in the future, if you ever have any questions that you'd like to ask me, go ahead and just please ask me. I'd love to answer them for you. So I'm just going to go ahead and get into it. Now I'm going to try and keep the video as short as I possibly can, but I will tell you I am going to be going to some fairly deep detail about some of the subjects because I think it's important to understand where they're coming from and some of the science behind them. And then during the video, I'm going to be talking about a few specific studies, and then I've never really experimented with editing software before, so cut me a little bit of slack here, but I'm trying to edit in some cool stuff, whether it's going to be up here in the corner or over there. I'm not really sure yet, so kind of just going off the top of my head with a bunch of this stuff. So I'll go ahead and get right into it. Obviously, I got the shoes over there, Becca and Joy, and all you people who made jokes about it. Yeah, I got a nice shoe collection. That's only a bit of them there, so we'll go ahead and get into the topic. So the first question that Becca asked me was, so she says, does the timing of meals and a lot of nutrients matter that much to the time of your workouts? I love the meals, but sometimes feel really heavy and slow moving during AM workouts and then starving by the end of the day. Now, before I answer this question specifically, I'm going to go to her second question because I want to start there and then we'll kind of circle back around because everything's sort of tied together. So her second question, well, it's a bunch of them, but we'll just hit this second one specifically. She says, I want to know the difference between a high-fat, low-carb diet and a lower-fat, high-carb diet. So, as you all know, anybody who knows me knows that I do not enjoy low-carb diets. I don't think that they're good. I don't think that there's a lot of good nutritional literature around their advocacy for long-term dieting success as well as performance. And we're going to get into some of that right now. So obviously I'm not just going to sit here and throw a bunch of BS at you guys and say, oh, they're not good, we'll just move on to the next thing. Let me get my coffee here. It's a little bit early in the morning. So I think to start off, you have to understand, let's first off hit the big one, okay? The ketogenic diet. That's the main thing that I think is really kind of surfacing now for a lot of people as something that they're doing, people are trying, they're interested in. There's a big resurgence in the fitness and nutrition industry. So first of all, the keto diet, this actually emerged in the early 1900s as a strategy to treat epilepsy. And it was founded, I want to say the diet was founded, but the term ketogenic diet was coined by Dr. Russell Wilder. And it was, again, like I said, it was found and continues to actually be an extremely effective treatment for treating epileptic seizures. And it's still used to this day. And in fact, I actually did a research paper in my undergrad talking about the effectiveness of ketogenic diets for treating certain neurological cancers. And again, it's advocacy for treating those cancers, and specifically epilepsy and epileptic seizures, has been established by the scientific literature for years. I'm not refuting that. In fact, I'm actually supporting that because it has viable data. Now, again, like I said, this was in the early 1900s, and then recently, low-carb diets have kind of gained mainstream popularity in the 1970s, obviously from Dr. Atkins. Everybody knows what the Atkins diet is. I would assume everybody who I'm speaking to has probably heard of that. Most of Atkins' ideas were rejected by, sound medical science for obvious reasons, but I know to some of you they're not very obvious, and we'll get into those. Unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, as again, we will get to why I say unfortunately soon, but there's been a big resurgence in this stuff recently in the fitness and nutrition industry. Typically, to understand this, we have to talk about what is a ketogenic diet. So, calories from carbs are often brought to only about 5% of total intake, 20% of calories coming from protein, and about 75% coming from fat. So, it's essentially a very high-fat, very low-carb, mild to moderate protein diet. So the big things that we have to talk about here, there's two things. Why is important for fat loss, or why people say it's the best diet or it's a good diet for fat loss, and then how does this affect our performance? And I think that's what Becca was really asking me. The main question is, how does each of these diets affect performance? And we'll get into that. But first thing, because I think it's a big issue that we have to talk about, and when you think about dieting, most people are thinking about losing weight, is why the proponents of these diets are saying they're better for fat loss. I'm telling you that they're not, and we're going to get into why. So the first thing that we want to talk about is the insulin hypothesis, the insulin fairy. I'm sure everybody's heard about this. Basically it centers around the idea that one of insulin's main actions is lipogenesis, or the formation of fat cells, and keeping insulin levels low by restricting carbohydrates should, and I emphasize the word should, result in more fat mobilization. Now, it appears to be theoretically sound, but it's bullshit. And there's a lot of problems, a number of problems actually, with this hypothesis. The first being that the main one, it's been experimentally falsified in the scientific literature for being too simplistic. And, here's the deal. As it's human nature to really like simple ideas, simple things, saying, well, hey, so insulin triggers lipogenesis, so keeping insulin levels low will stop the storage of body fat. Boom, that's awesome. It's simple. It's even kind of sounds kind of cool and sciencey, but again, it's just not true, okay? Carbs are not the only nutrient that spikes insulin. And in fact, actually, protein is extremely insulin-genic, okay? Protein spikes insulin a lot. And then the biggest thing, in my opinion, which is, as to why I think that the insulin hypothesis is total nonsense, is that insulin is not required for fat storage. There's a hormone called ASP, it's called acylation stimulating protein, that actually triggers the storage of fat while insulin levels are low in the bloodstream. So, if you ever met someone who ever told you that chronically high levels of insulin is required for fat storage, it's just not true. And ultimately, that person who says that just doesn't have a general understanding of human biochemistry, or nutritional biochemistry at that. And another topic to talk about is that, it's been well established in the scientific literature that a prolonged energy surplus is the main factor that drives fat gain, not a single hormone. And one thing I also want to talk about is that insulin in and of itself, it is a hormone. It does not contain it doesn't have calories, okay? So, as we all know, in order to put on body fat or gain weight, you need to be in an excess, a surplus of calories. So something that doesn't contain calories can't make you gain weight. It's almost along the lines of saying, Diet Coke makes people fat. Well, no. See, the issue is that people who drink Diet Coke are typically more likely to not really give a crap about their diet. They're probably more likely to exercise less. They're probably more likely to smoke. They're probably more likely to drink alcohol to excess, and they're probably more likely to just eat, whatever, whenever, how much ever, okay? So remember, correlation does not equal causation. Just because two things occur at the same time does not mean that one caused the other, okay? And then the biggest thing that you have to understand, and this really takes into account when we're talking about people in a caloric deficit, the insulinic response to a meal will never supersede a caloric deficit. So if you are in a caloric deficit, if you are taking in less calories than if you are burning more calories than you are taking in every day, it doesn't matter how high a meal spikes your insulin. It will never supersede the caloric deficit. Okay, so that's important to understand. The second reason is why people kind of promote the ketogenic diet is that they feel that it somehow provides a metabolic advantage. Basically, this theory is centered around the idea that since it is more energy costly for the body to convert proteins to glucose, which is true, without carbs, the body wastes calories and will essentially lose more fat. As a whole, the scientific community has really pushed back against this notion. And then I think, really the thing, rather than looking at it as offering a metabolic advantage, I think it's more likely that simply it just suppresses appetite. Which, it has an effect this is an effect that has been repeatedly shown in the scientific literature that's centered around ketogenic diet studies, that it does have a very good appetite suppressing effect. And that's, again, remember, you will see as we move forward with this talk and, with any nutritional recommendations I give you guys, when there's sound scientific data, when there's repeatable stuff that keeps showing, that proves this, and this, I will absolutely support that. And removing carbohydrates in place of fats is not the only way to control hunger. And we will kind of get into this a little bit later because Becca had another good question regarding the timing of meals as well. And, ultimately the big thing with the ketogenic diet is that you're eliminating a lot of foods. So in my opinion, the fact that you lose weight, it's not really surprising. You're taking almost an entire macronutrient out of your diet. And for a lot of people out there, people who exercise, people who don't exercise, calories from carbohydrates do contribute a large portion of their daily intake. So removing that would make sense to kind of, that you're gonna lose weight. So in my opinion, I think the main truth regarding, those diets for fat loss is that it's good at reducing appetite and it focuses on food elimination. So, as I said with any of this stuff, guys, if it's something that you really feel like will work for you, I will support that. But I think moving into the next idea here is we're going to talk about for performance. And one last thing that I want to touch on, a lot of people kind of talk about that very quick, rapid weight loss that comes with ketogenic dieting right away. So for 1 gram of glycogen, which is carbohydrates, that's, glycogen is stored in your liver, and that's the way that your body stores carbohydrates for energy. It also stores it in fat cells, what we're just talking about for energy. For every 1 gram of glycogen that your body stores, 3 grams of water, or H2O in chemistry terms, I know that sounds dumb, is attached to it. So when people cut out carbohydrates, that initial large weight loss, it is water weight, okay? And then a lot of times what happens is people, they'll plateau because they're not losing water anymore. So they'll think they're not losing, so then they'll revert back to their original dietary strategy, and they'll end up putting that weight back on. But they didn't lose body fat to begin with, and they didn't put body fat back on when they went back to their original thing. And then what happens is that things just spiral out of control. They get upset. Psychologically, it starts messing with them. They start, excuse me for saying, but they use what I like to call, they go to the fuck it mentality, where they just start eating, emotional eating comes into play. And that's kind of where you see people doing these types of diets where they'll lose a lot of weight quickly, but then they'll regain it all back and then some, okay? They're just not really understanding what's going on. So, sorry to go off on that rant, but I wanted to kind of touch on some of those subjects. Now, moving on to Becca's question about performance. So, we're going to talk about some studies here. The first one I'm going to talk about is a study in 2014 that was published. It's a meta-analysis, let me rephrase that, published in the Journal of American Medical Association. It was analyzed. They analyzed 48 studies and the efficacy of popular fat diets for weight loss, and found that all calorie-restricted diets produce weight loss. And real quick, I want to touch on, I apologize, we haven't gotten to the performance section yet. I've got all my notes here, so I kind of messed up rephrasing that. We're still on the topic of weight loss, but we're almost there. So, as I said, this study analyzed 48 studies, and ultimately, at the end of the day, they found that every single one of them, ketogenic or even a calorie-controlled Western diet, produced weight loss when they are calorie-restricted, okay? And then another study compared low-carb diets to calorie-matched conventional diets in overweight individuals. And they found that weight loss is achieved irrespective of the diet being low-carbohydrate or balanced. Now, this study in particular was not keto, because low-carb is not keto. There's a big difference there. Some people who go low-carb, their calories could be almost 20% of calories coming from carb. Keto is less than 5. So, for that, we're going to turn to a study that was published in 2015. It's a meta-analysis by Bueno and colleagues that analyzed only studies that restricted carbohydrates to 5% of calories. Now, I will admit, the study did show that there was a 1 kilogram or 2.2 pound advantage in weight loss in the ketogenic diet arm of the study over the conventional study. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it was clinically insignificant while statistically significant. Now, what does that mean? That means that over the course of the study, the statistics of that, yes, it was statistically significant. Now, it's important that you have to analyze nutritional studies from a statistics standpoint. But in the clinical setting, the real-world setting, it was insignificant because both arms of the study produced very similar amounts of weight loss. And one thing that a lot of these studies didn't do is they didn't control for protein. And the reason why I think it's important to bring that up is that what ended up happening was, and again, we don't have a bunch of evidence to suggest this, but I think it's very clear that this is what occurred, is the people, they replaced the calories coming from carbohydrate with protein. And so again, it's not really surprising that they produced a little bit more weight loss due to the fact that protein is the most satiating macronutrient of proteins, carbs, and fats of all three. means that the more protein that you have in the diet, you're going to feel more full, which is always why I recommend a high protein diet. And second, protein is more thermogenic than carbohydrates or fats, meaning that your body will use more calories burning or digesting protein than it will carbohydrates or fats. Another thing that's kind of talked about is, as I said, the ketogenic diet's efficacy for improving insulin sensitivity. Obviously, as your insulin sensitivity goes up, you are better able to utilize carbohydrates, and as your insulin sensitivity reduces, which usually occurs with people becoming more overweight, you start to run into problems with carbohydrate intake, and essentially just clearing insulin from the blood. And then cardiovascular health. Again, yes, ketogenic dieting does improve insulin sensitivity, but so does losing weight, and so does controlling for caloric intake. And then as far as cardiovascular health goes, yes, ketogenic dieting can improve cardiovascular health, but so does losing weight, so does exercising, so does controlling your caloric intake. So to say that it has some advantage over any other style of diet is just simply not supported by the scientific literature and by the data. That's just not what it says. So now we are moving into the performance aspect. So is ketogenic dieting or a low-carb, high-fat diet better for strength and muscle building? Most trials show benefits for keto, most trials that show benefits for keto, because I'm not saying these things don't exist. There are studies that have been done that show benefits of ketogenic dieting for strength and muscle building over the other diets. They don't control for protein intake. And again, so it's not surprising that these groups come out on top, because obviously, as I said before, I highly recommend a high protein diet given the fact that its efficacy for building muscle and laying down solid muscle tissue. Obviously you need to be in a caloric surplus to gain muscle, but you also need to have a high protein diet. I can guarantee you, and this will kind of get into another question later, but if you're not eating a high protein diet, then you're going to run into issues of building muscle. Or just you're not going to be able to do it as effectively as someone else who's following a high protein regimen. And recently a study from Wilson and colleagues looked at calorie and protein matched diets, specifically looking at ketogenic diets for muscle building and strength. And what they ended up finding was that keto is probably worse for endurance than it is for strength, but it's probably really not helping both. And then another 2015 study from Burke and colleagues notes that assuming calories and protein are matched, there's really just going to be no benefit for going keto. And remember how I said assuming calories and proteins are matched, they have to be, they should be. If you're going to compare two diets, everything about the diets has to be matched, okay? And if you're going to compare specifically two diets for weight loss or for strength and muscle building, every single variable has to be exactly the same except for the diets themselves. So that's another thing to think about when you're reading some nutritional research is was everything the same? Were they compared? Was the study set up to where you could really make a correlation between these two, these two effects? Is this causing this? Is that causing that? You see what I'm trying to say? So now I real quick want to touch on intermittent fasting. The reason why I want to touch on intermittent fasting is because the first question that Becca asked, let me go back to it really quick. So she said, we'll get into the top. So let's see. I love the meals, but sometimes feel really heavy and slow moving during AM workouts and starving by the end of the day. So, and, she talked about the timing of things. So if you're not sure what intermittent fasting is, basically intermittent fasting is restricting your caloric intake to a specific window throughout the day. This was actually popularized by a man named Martin Burkhan. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the Lean Gains protocol. It's basically where he restricted his calories to a 6 to 8 hour feeding window and then fasted for the rest of the calories. And that feeding window was centered around weight training. And essentially what he did was he would eat lunch, his first meal of the day, I guess I should call it, around 1 p.m., finish his calories by 8 p.m. that evening, and then totally fast for 16 or 18 hours or whatever up until 1 p.m. the next day. Now, one thing that I want to talk about regarding, the literature about this is that, there's some really good studies that do show that intermittent fasting can be a great tool for helping people lose weight, but actually that's really been only shown in obese individuals. So when you talk about people who are naturally lean or people who are low body fat percentages, intermittent fasting might be good for maintaining weight, but it's not necessarily the best thing for trying to build strength or build muscle or strength. The main reason why is because, well, I'll talk about, a 2013 study that was focusing on anabolic signaling and MPS, or muscle protein synthesis. So what the study found is that muscle protein synthesis and anabolic signaling was greater when consuming 4 separate 20-gram doses of protein spread out evenly over the course of a day when compared to either 2 doses of 40 grams of protein or 8 doses of 10 grams of protein. So it's basically what I'm trying to say is that, you're going to be better off. I know that the whole 4, 5, 6 meals a day thing, it's ultimately a myth. At the end of the day, your total overall daily caloric intake is what matters. But for muscle protein synthesis, trying to build muscle, performance, anabolic signaling, it's probably best that you spread, your protein intake over, 4 or 5 little separate feedings over the course of a day. So how does this play into intermittent fasting? And why am I even touching on this subject based off of Becca's question? Well, I'm touching on this subject because, one strategy that I recommend people using for two kind of fold about Becca's question. The first off, she's feeling heavy in the morning workouts. You can do one of two things. If you feel like you can train fasted and train at peak performance, that might be a good way for you to not feel like crap or feel bogged down from a heavy meal in the morning. Second thing I want to touch on as well is, again, people talk about breakfast being the most important meal, or you need to, it sparks your metabolism. That's, excuse me for saying, it's a bunch of bullshit. Eating breakfast does not spark your metabolism. It doesn't do that at all. And in fact, actually, going along that same lines, people talk about not eating after 6 p.m. at night. Again, that's BS as well. It's just a general nutritional myth. In fact, actually, there's been studies that have gone to show that your basal metabolic rate is the exact same while you're sleeping as it is while you're resting. And in fact, actually, a couple of these studies have shown that there's been an increase in your basal metabolic rate while you're sleeping over when you're in, an awake or fed state, which I thought was very interesting. So don't buy into that stuff. As I said, at the end of the day, it's your daily caloric intake that matters. But then also getting back on that, so that's one thing you could do, Becca, or anyone else who's struggling with that is that you could kind of push your meals back to later in the day. And then this also talks about the second thing that she says, where she's starving by the end of the day. So if that's the case for you, what I would recommend is, as you wake up and as you move throughout your day, eating extremely light and then saving the majority of your calories for dinner. I do this myself. I'm the type of person where I want to feel, in order for me to sleep, I have to feel full. I have to feel like I ate a nice big meal. I have a huge appetite. In order for me to stay fairly lean, I have to watch and control my caloric intake. So with that said, I maintain my weight. I weigh about 168, 170 pounds right now. I maintain that weight eating around 3,200 calories a day. I probably have, between waking up at 6 a.m. and then in between 6 a.m. and 1 o'clock, I might have maybe 1,200 calories. And then for my, in between 3 and 9 o'clock at night, I'll probably have about 2,000 calories. Sometimes it might be one big meal and one small one gigantic meal. It just really depends. That's my personal preference. I recommend you doing what works for you, okay? And then kind of toying around with that. But basically, to simply answer your question, Becca, I think you can either train fasted. One good strategy for you would be maybe to have a protein shake with some good liquid carbs, some sugary liquid carbs. That would give you some energy for your workouts, but wouldn't really bog you down. You could slowly sip that while you're working out, or you could have it an hour before. If you're going to eat a big meal before you work out, I'm pretty sure that you work out very early in the morning. I would recommend trying to get that meal at least an hour before the training session. But if you can't, I would try the liquid thing, or if you can, just train fasted. I know it's not looks. I can't train fasted. My performance just goes out the window. So it doesn't work for everybody. So that's just one thing to talk about. And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on, going back to that protein thing, and I'm going to put up a graph on the screen here. A lot of people, they talk about, well, I thought you can only absorb X amount of protein at a specific time. So that's not true. Excuse me, coffee. So what this graph is going to show is that muscle protein synthesis peaked at around, I believe it on there, it's about 20 to 30 grams, and then it kind of started to taper off at 40. So all that means is that as compared to 10 grams of protein to 20, muscle protein synthesis is going to have a drastic increase from 10 to 20, but not really a large increase from 20 to 40. So can you absorb 40 grams of protein in one sitting? Of course you can. You can absorb 80 grams of protein in one sitting, but you're not going to receive a metabolic or muscle protein or synthesis or an anabolic advantage by doing so. So that's why I mentioned, 20 to 30 grams of protein at a meal is probably a solid recommendation, spacing that out over the course of a day. I think that's going to probably provide the most benefit for building strength and muscle. So I hope that I answered that question for you, Becca. I know I went into a lot of detail with that, guys, so I'm going to move on to some next stuff to keep this video fairly short. And Becca, I know you had a bunch of other questions. I will get to those in a second. Amanda Mallory, she asks, advice for people not needing to lose weight. She wants to tone and build muscle and then focusing on some MyFitnessPal settings. So I think it's important to talk about with this. So toning. Toning is essentially, I don't want to use the word toning because I think that that's kind of thrown around in the fitness industry as, I don't want to build muscle, I want to tone. And, again, I think it's important to touch on these things. That's typically something that you hear from a lot of females. They don't want to get bulky. They don't want to build a whole lot of muscle. They just want to look lean, but with that tone, So here's the deal. In order to tone, you need to have a solid base of muscle mass, and then you need to lose body fat, okay? And in order to have the solid base of muscle mass, you need to build muscle mass, okay? So to answer your question, Amanda, I think really what you want to know is how do I put on some good muscle without getting really, really bulky? And then after I've done that, how can I start to sort of reveal that through my diet? So it seems to me like you're at a point right now where you don't need to lose weight. I haven't seen you in person, so I can't really make that visual observation. But if you're asking the question, I would assume that's probably where you're at. So what I would do is if you're looking to put on muscle, and this goes for anybody during the challenge, you're going to want to add anywhere from about 250 to 500 calories every day on top of your basal metabolic rate. So remember how, Coach Chris, he went over this video yesterday about the MyFitnessPal thing, talking about being in a 200 to 500 calorie deficit in order to lose weight. Just do the inverse for trying to put on muscle, okay? So another good kind of standard that you can go by is that if you're gaining more than 1 to 2 pounds per week, you're probably putting on body fat. And that's just not necessarily something that you want to do. Again, I know I've said this to people who've worked with me before numerous times, but if you're looking to gain muscle, you are going to have to accept the fact that you're going to put on a little bit of body fat at the same time, unless you want to take steroids, which I don't recommend. I would never support someone doing that. Obviously, there's a lot of negative side effects that can occur with doing that, so I wouldn't recommend that. So that's what I would do, Amanda, is that I would focus on gaining 1 to 2 pounds of body weight per week while lifting heavy. And when I say heavy, I mean no less than 70% of your 1 rep maxes. When we say lift heavy, this should feel freaking heavy. You're going to want to talk about, now, I'm not speaking in terms of the CrossFit workouts. That's a separate entity here. Look, I do have my CrossFit L1. I'm not clueless as to how CrossFit programming should go. But for those types of questions, I'm going to refer you to Coach Mark, Coach Jarrett, Coach Chris, Coach Kelsey. They're more along the, as far as CrossFit training goes, they're the experts on that. I know a lot about it, but it's just not my area of expertise. Obviously, nutrition is, and then when it comes to, just base, I hate to use the word, but I'll say kind of bodybuilding style training, I feel like that I am fairly versed in that type of stuff. But yeah, to take that into a CrossFit realm, I would say no less than 70% of your 1 rep maxes. But yeah, MyFitnessPal settings, just add an extra 200 to 500 calories every day, track your weight over the course of 1 to 2 weeks, and, see what happens. Look at the trend. Weigh yourself every morning consistently, like I talked about in the previous video, and then look at the trend and see what happens. So I hope that answered your question. If you have any further questions regarding that, please reach out to me. Like I said, you got my email and my phone number should be in the previous video. I'll put it again at the bottom of this video in case anybody needs it. So back to Becca's second let's see, meal timing for the allotted nutrients. I briefly touched upon this really quick in the portion that I did about intermittent fasting, or kind of saving your calories for the rest of the day, so you're not starving at night. There is some research that shows that, specifically when I was talking about the protein thing, that type of meal timing spaced out over the course of a day absolutely does matter. But again, you know, as long as you're recovering well, and you know, you're making sure that whatever goal you have, whether it's muscle building or losing weight, you're hitting that goal in terms of caloric intake for the day. Meal timing doesn't really matter. It should go to personal preference. You might have a little bit more energy during your workouts, as I said earlier, you know, consuming a high carb, moderate protein meal or shake or whatever, you know, an hour before training, and then you might notice a little bit better recovery consuming the same meal or shake, you know, within an hour after. But there's not really any, you know, there's this anabolic window myth that you need to consume protein 30 minutes after workout. That's really not, that's been kind of proven to not be the case. You know, muscle protein synthesis actually has been shown to be elevated, sometimes actually almost 72 hours after a workout. So you've got plenty of time to consume calories. You know, think of things over the course of a day. So no, meal timing isn't really the biggest factor. Remember, at the end of the day, caloric balance is going to be the best one, or surplus or deficit, whatever your goal is. But, you know, experiment with this stuff. Try having a meal or a shake an hour before you work out. See if you perform better. And then try having one an hour after you work out. See if you recover better. See if you sleep better that night. See if your muscles are less sore. You know what I mean? You gotta, different things work for different people. You gotta try different things. Let's see, she asks, is there a benefit to focusing on micros if you've got macros kind of taken under control? Absolutely. You guys definitely know. I take a very 80-20 approach to diet. I don't do restriction. I think that sets people up for failure. You know, sugar does not cause cancer. Sugar is not as bad for you as smoking. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And then I would, you know, down the road, I am going to do a topic or a video specifically focusing on sugar. So don't worry, I will get to that, and I will give you all the good science on that. You know, 80% of your diet should come from whole, unprocessed, unadulterated, natural food sources. You know, I always talk about my clients hitting your protein and your fiber goals. In order to hit a fiber goal of around 15 grams per 1,000 kilocalories per day for men and women, so let's say if you're eating 2,000 calories, you want to eat 30 grams of fiber a day, you have to eat fruits and vegetables. And don't not eat fruits and vegetables. They are absolutely required for long-term health. And, you know, recently someone made a comment about fiber, the importance for health being totally overstated. That is just not true at all. The importance of fiber for long-term health, colon health, digestive health has been established long time ago, and it's got numerous years and years of research proving that is something that's extremely important for long-term health. So yeah, I definitely think you should focus on micros. But again, keep it simple. 80% of your diet coming from whole, unprocessed foods. Eat a variety of fruits and vegetables every day. You'll be just fine. You know, take a multivitamin if you need it. But yes, Becca, I think focusing on micros is an important aspect of an overall healthy diet. Can people lose weight eating junk food? Absolutely, you can. It's true, you can. Is it good for long-term health? No, it's probably not. So that's where I would go for that. Why and when you should bulk, mass, or cut? Well, I'm going to keep this simple. When you should cut. Women, if you're above 20 to 22% body fat, it's probably a good idea to cut first. Men, above 15 to 18% body fat, probably want to cut first. Women, if you are below or at 15% body fat, you want to bulk or mass first. Men, if you are at or below 10% body fat, you want to bulk or mass first. And real quick, Joy Collins, what is cutting? Cutting is losing body fat. That's all it is. It's the same thing. A fat loss diet, a cutting diet, losing fat, cutting, it's the same thing. Then Becca asked the mental and physical pros and cons of doing this, and then cycling back between these stages. So obviously, when I work with people, I have them cutting for no longer than 12 weeks due to the fact that what will happen is your metabolism will downregulate. You will start burning less calories at rest. You will start burning less calories during exercise. And this can run into a lot of issues for a lot of people. You know, you're going to start feeling lethargic. Your sleep's going to start to suffer. Your recovery is going to suffer. Your performance is going to suffer. And then obviously, you know, staying in a prolonged caloric surplus for longer than 12 weeks. Putting on excess amount of body fat. There's numerous disadvantages of that health-wise, and insulin sensitivity starts to decrease. Obviously, you're going to weigh more. Putting on body fat is continuously associated with negative metabolic adaptations. So that's a big thing. Now, some mental stuff that I think can go along with that. Obviously, if you've been in a diet for 12 weeks, going into a mass phase, the increased food, that's going to do wonders for your mental and psychological state. Obviously, if you've been putting on weight for 12 weeks and you're starting to feel a little bit quote-unquote fluffy than you are comfortable with, starting to hit a cutting phase is going to really mentally help with that. So there's a million things that can kind of go into this, Becca. I know I'm not going to touch on every single one of them, and when I get back, I'd love to have a conversation with you regarding some of these things personally, because I think everybody struggles with this stuff. I do. Everyone does. We all want to look good. You know what I mean? It's the truth. We all want to look good, but we also all want to perform good, and there's a delicate balance between those two. Next thing, increasing strength while cutting. So individual responses to this is going to vary, but one important thing to understand is that if you're going on a 12-week diet and you start losing strength really immediately, your diet is set up very poorly. As long as you've got a high protein diet, which, that's the big factor as to why people are able to maintain muscle mass while they're in a caloric deficit, is having a high protein diet. You should maintain your strength, if nothing else, at least maintain for at least the first 9 to 10 weeks of the diet. Getting towards week 11 or 12, and even if you were to push the diet to 16 weeks, which I wouldn't recommend, but some people do for like bodybuilding shows and stuff, you're going to start losing strength around that time. Now, some people do increase strength. It just depends. I can't give you a sound recommendation on that, but what I can say is the one thing that we do know is that as long as your protein intake and your diet is set up properly, you should at least, if nothing else, maintain the majority of strength for the majority of the diet. And again, on a personal basis, for anyone who's watching the video, I'd love to work with you and set that up with you. That's going to be a very individual thing. Next question Becca asks, do cravings mean deficiencies? So like if you're craving something sweet, you'll see a bunch of these stupid like things on Instagram where like, if you're craving chocolate, go have carrots or something. I don't know. I don't have one picture in front of me. I know they're dumb off the top of my head. A lot of them are, focused around people who are in this quote unquote clean eating group. If you want something sweet, eat something sweet. If you're craving something fatty, eat something fatty. If you're craving protein, you might need to eat a little bit more protein. I think that those things, pay attention to your body. Just as I would say, pay attention to what you want there, pay attention to your hunger cues. You don't need to eat every single thing that's on your plate if you're trying to lose weight. You don't need to, stuff your face. You don't need to go up to, have that third plate at the buffet or at the workplace meal or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, pay attention to things. Eat slowly. Be in the moment. If you're at a social event, converse with everyone around you. You know what I mean? Don't just sit there and stuff your face until you're ridiculously full and then, all right, start talking to everybody. You know what I mean? Like, take sips of water between meals. Drink a couple glasses of water before you eat. But yeah, I think if you're craving something, have it. I think that, as I said earlier, restriction is the worst thing that you can do. That's when people start binging on stuff. So if you're craving something, definitely have it. And, as far as deficiencies go, you'd really have to get a blood test to test those. I could sit here and tell you all this crap all day long, but, you need to go to a doctor and get a blood test, and they'll be able to tell you if you're deficient in certain things. And then, if that was the case, then you could start to treat those deficiencies through a dietary intervention. That would be, in my opinion, the most sound advice I could give you. And then, last question, looking and performing like Brooke Entz. So simple, take steroids. So a lot of people are going to disagree with me on this, and again, you know what? Am I with Brooke Entz 24 hours a day? Have I ever even been in the same room with her? Absolutely not. But I can say beyond a shadow of a doubt that I'm pretty sure she's taking steroids. Hormonal-wise, it's extremely difficult for women to get that muscular and stay that lean year-round without taking steroids. Now, obviously, with everything, there's going to be statistical outliers. Perfect example is people like Matt Frazier and Rich Froning. I can say along the same coin that beyond a shadow of a doubt that both of them are probably never and not taking steroids. They are just absolute freaks of nature. But one good rule of thumb you can talk about, and I'm going to use Noah Olson is a male example of this. And again, as I said, I am not with these people. Do I have undeniable proof that they are taking steroids? No, I do not. I'll be the first to admit that. But if you just look at them, both of those people, and you can see their head is just kind of disproportionate to the size of their body, that's usually a common thing that you see between unnatural lifters and physique competitors. So now, that's not to say that I'm taking away from the hard work. Obviously, if you follow Noah Olson or Brooke Entz on YouTube or Instagram, anything like that, they are extremely amazing exercisers. They're extremely fit. They're very strong. I'm not taking away from that. They work their asses off. But if you want to look and perform like Brooke Entz, she's probably going to take steroids. Or she's probably taking steroids. I think that is a very realistic possibility. It's just something to think about. And a big thing, Becca, I know you're going to hate me for saying this, but it's the truth. Don't compare yourself to other people. That is the easiest way to set yourself up for disappointment. Focus on being the best that you can be, looking the best that you can look, performing the best that you can. And that way, you'll always be happy with your results. Joy talks about changing macros when goals change. So as I said before, don't necessarily look at it from changing macros when your goals change. When you're cutting, you need to be in a deficit. When you're bulking, you need to be in a surplus as far as macros go. And then real quick, Kathy talked about the macro breakdown importance. These kind of two go hand in hand. So I definitely, for myself, for my clients, while they're in a cutting phase, I typically have them focusing on a 40% carbohydrate, 30% fat, 30% protein split in terms of the breakdown of the macros. And then when people are trying to bulk, put on body weight, I typically recommend a 50% carbohydrate, 30% fat, and 20% protein breakdown. The reason for this is that the main reason for the bulking one is that carbohydrates are anabolic. They work synergistically with protein, and they are insulinogenic, as I said, to help shuttle nutrients, specifically protein, into cells to help grow. And so that's why I recommend having a higher carbohydrate intake. Also, while you're intaking more food, having a higher carbohydrate intake can help performance in the gym. So if you're in a caloric surplus, why wouldn't you want to use that to your advantage to train harder, lift heavier, and get stronger? And as far as the 40-30-30 split macro breakdown goes for cutting, I just find that provides the allotted amount of dietary fat in the diet to maintain healthy hormone levels. It provides enough dietary carbohydrate to maintain performance, and it provides enough dietary protein to maintain muscle mass while cutting. Muscle mass while cutting, as well as maintaining strength. That is why that is important. Now, Kathy did have another little breakdown of the question she asked. I think she said, how important is it to daily goals that you're focusing on the macro breakdown? Your daily goals, look, at the end of the day, as I said, calories are what matters. That's what I want you guys to focus on. So if one day you're eating a larger percentage of fat than is set in your MyFitnessPal, just don't go over on your calories, you know what I mean? But what I would recommend, though, is trying to stick to those daily goals as close as you possibly can. And I mentioned this on the MyFitnessPal video that Chris did yesterday, but plus or minus 5 grams of each macronutrient is considered compliant. So if you're supposed to eat 300 grams of carbs a day and you have 305 or you have 295, you'll be just fine. And as I said, Kathy, I know that you asked how important is it for the macro breakdown for your daily goals. Going back to what I just recently said about the splits that I typically do for people who are cutting or bulking, having that 40-30-30 split for people who are cutting, for the, as I said, it provides a good amount of dietary fat to maintain healthy hormone levels, digestion, all that stuff. It provides a good amount of carbohydrate to function, perform in the gym, and it provides a necessary amount of protein to maintain muscle mass. I keep saying math. As well as maintain strength during the cut. Those are the reasons why it's important to hit those, okay? There's really no magic behind it. And again, those macro breakdowns aren't going to supersede the caloric deficit. But, it's one thing to lose weight, but it's another thing to lose body fat. And remember, as I always tell, and I tell this to my clients, the scale doesn't mean shit, okay? What we're chasing is an improved body composition. So if you weigh 170 pounds right now and you want to lose 10 pounds, if you lost 10 pounds of body fat, but the scale said 170 pounds when you got back on it after 12 weeks, you wouldn't give a shit because you're going to look better. Remember, we're not chasing a number on the scale. We're chasing an improved body composition through proper dietary interventions and exercise. And obviously some other things, stress management, recovery, all those different aspects. So I'm going to cut the video off here, guys. I know it's probably pretty long already. Thanks for taking the time to watch it if you stuck with me this long. And then one thing I just really want to quick, again, guys, I know there's a lot of people out there who know me, who know my kind of nutritional philosophy. There's a lot of people who probably don't, who've never met me before. And there's also probably a lot of people who disagree with me. And that's totally fine. But what I can say, guys, is that, I think nutrition in and of itself is an ongoing investigative process. That's probably why I'm so interested in it. And it's going to be very individualized. What works for one person isn't going to work for another. And one thing that I can tell you, again, might be another hard pill to swallow for some people is that when it comes to making large evidence-based recommendations to mass amounts of people, anecdotal evidence doesn't mean shit. So what worked for you, it doesn't matter. What matters is what you can prove by repeatable data over, creating studies and getting repeatable results over and over again, and kind of swapping out different parameters and, playing with different variables. But that's what matters. And those are the things that I teach to you guys, is I give you the scientific literature that shows repeatable evidence, okay? And, if I could leave you guys with one thing I really want you to focus on is, you think to yourself, well, who should I listen to when I hear this, hear that? I want you to focus on 5 things, okay? If you listen to someone talk about nutrition and they reject the laws of energy balance, they don't know what they're talking about. If they claim that certain foods make you fat by clogging your hormones, or just general, like one specific macronutrient or one specific food does make you fat, they don't know what they're talking about, and they don't have an understanding of general biochemistry or nutritional biochemistry for that matter. If they rant about how sugar is ruining your life, they just don't know what they're talking about. That's not what the scientific literature states, and I will absolutely go into a video specifically revolving around that subject at a later date. They push other foods as the keys to weight loss. And then lastly, they basically, try and refute how a century of metabolic research apparently has it all wrong, and this person knows better from watching a few YouTube videos. If you ever meet someone like that, guys, you want to run the other direction. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Sorry if it's a little bit too long. Like I said, I can go into a lot of detail about these subjects, and I think it's important to, at some point, to really understand the science behind them. So thanks for taking the time out to listen to this. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. I hope you all have a great day.